chair the Constitutional Implementation Oversight Committee, which is tasked with ensuring that Parliament enacts all the necessary pieces of legislation to give effect to the various provisions of the Constitution. If you look at our Constitution, Articles 9, 28, and 43, you find the anchor on the issue of homelessness. We have terminologies there like inherent human dignity, social justice, and specifically in Article 43, where we have social and economic rights, one of which is right to accessible and adequate housing and reasonable standards of sanitation. You'd think that the Kenyan Constitution adopts the policy of what we call social market economy, if you read the rubric of our Bill of Rights. In terms of international practice and international conventions and treaties of which Kenya is a party, again, Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights also create a responsibility on part of the government to provide adequate housing. I would like to look at this issue in certain dichotomies. For one, there's the issue of homelessness. And if you look at homelessness or streetism, it is the lack of a stable, safe, and adequate housing, nor the means and ability to have one. But that is mainly within an urban setting when you describe it that way. But there's also the question of inadequate housing, where you don't have proper sanitation, proper services, which then you find that more prevalent in rural areas. So in terms of what we are discussing, there's homelessness, but there's also the question of inadequate housing. And then there's the question of urban homelessness and inadequate housing in rural areas. It is not just something that is limited to the urban areas. If you look at our Constitution, it is a requirement that all government policies, be they social, economic, and cultural, should promote human rights. And at the center of these human rights is what is called inherent human dignity. So we should, as we debate, we should try and interrogate the government policies to see how far they are implementing this particular requirement. Some of the numbers that you come across is that globally, about 320 million people are homeless in urban areas or live in the streets. And that is those who live in parks, the streets, open spaces, cars, temporary shelters, or emergency accommodation, but within the urban setting, about 320 million. Those who lack adequate housing, in other words, those rural folk, are about 2.8 billion. 2.8 billion, and that is about 1/3 of the human population. And within urban areas, or peri-urban areas, there are about 1.1 billion people who live in informal settlements. These are what sometimes we call the slums. 90% of those are in Africa and Asia. And when Marianne talked about India, my first visit to India was quite a shocker. I arrived at 3 a.m. in the morning at Mumbai International Airport, and when I got out, I've never seen so many people like that. But that was 3 a.m. Driving into Mumbai, there are people all over. The divide of the highways, people live there. On the sides, people live there. When I woke up in the morning, I pulled the curtains. I've never seen so many people descend into town. I had to close the curtain and call one of my friends and say, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I'd never seen so many. If you go to the railway line, it is like ants entering. You've seen ants when they're in a formation. Some are going in, some are coming out. That is the situation there. So with that divide, I just want to give you some thoughts that I have. You see, informal settlements, places like Kibra, Madari and the rest, they're a function, in my view, of labor supply. Because people have to live nearer to where they work. And if the industrial parks or the places where they work, or if the affluent areas where they offer services as house helps and the rest are nearby, there'll always be informal settlements. So if you want to solve that problem, then you have to solve the transportation question. The Kibra is where it is because they can walk from there to industrial area and back without paying bus fare or any other costs. It's a function of labor supply to me. It is not that people found open land. That is why even if you go to Loresho or Muthaiga or wherever, you'll find informal settlements around them. Because the people who offer their labor in those posh areas have to leave somewhere to work. And I think it's a question that as we debate this, the academics will tell us. Some areas where this question has been asked and solved, they provide what they call affordable transportation system, light rail networks. You can take people can even live in Naivasha and come and work in Nairobi if they are sure that train will arrive on time and it will be affordable. So if you want to help Kibra people, or you want to decant Kibra, and we did this with the former Prime Minister, the first blocks that we built there. What we discovered is as soon as we built them, the people who moved in moved out and rented them out because of affordability question, but also because they have to go and work, but now they have extra income. So there are questions, social questions that we need to understand. But to me, informal settlements are a function of labor supply and a question of transportation and the cost of it, from where people live to where they work. I would also like to say that in terms of my role as chair of CIOC, I look at homelessness as a question of human rights. You know, we have something called cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment of people. We have to look at it in that context, that homelessness or lack of adequate housing is a violation of fundamental human rights. Because when you're homeless, you are denied the right to enjoy certain other fundamental human rights that are inherent and specific to you. There's even criminalization. You know, in this country, there used to be Vagrancy Act. Yeah, I think you remember that. Or loitering with intent. Yes, all sorts of questions. So it is a question of human rights when we deal with this issue. Today, we have a very serious challenge also called urban gentrification. Urban gentrification is where formerly poor areas in urban areas are then taken over by more wealthy people. And they build expensive homes, basically displacing the earlier populations who cannot afford to live there anymore. And it is happening in very many ways. We have the question, if you study land law, there's something called peri-urban areas. Places like Ruruta Satellite were peri-urban areas of Nairobi. They were rural areas. If you go to Karen, Karinde is a peri-urban area. What they call Karen End, but they call it Karinde. But today, you've seen flats have started coming up there. So the poor people who are initially there are being pushed out. And God forbid if you are there and you don't have a title. If you have a title, you probably could get compensated. But if you don't have a title, they'll create a title on your land and evict you. And then push you away. And then you see what is happening in Woodley. It is a very interesting case because I'm still trying to understand it. Woodley was an affluent, affordable area, but now they're doing affordable housing there. And I'm wondering whether the affordable housing, now the rich are being displaced in Woodley, or what will come of it. I'm still struggling to understand it. But we have this serious problem of urban gentrification in Nairobi and all our town centers, where the rural peri-urban population is being displaced, or simply where the rich come and redevelop and price out the poor people, pushing them further into the margins. Many of us talked about Jogoo Road, where Jerusalem, Shauri Moyo, all those. Those estates were built on something called the bed space theory. Bed space theory was a South African apartheid term that the white folks, when they came here, adopted. That Africans did not work to earn a pension. Africans worked because they wanted to get an income, either to go and pay dowry, buy a bicycle, or build a house, or buy a posho mill, or something like that. And that they didn't come to work with their wives. So if you look at those estates, many of them actually started as horse sheds. If you study the land law of our country, because there was racecourse. You remember that area is called racecourse. So the first settlements there were Africans who looked after the horses. But then when the railway came, and because the railway was the first employer, formal employer in this country, in Mombasa, there were no cranes to load and offload. So it had to be human labor. And this, I'm not going to demean any community, but it is just a genetical fact. The cranes just happened to be Luos and Luyas. Because they tried a bit of the Digos and the Mijikendas. They couldn't carry the 90 kg bags. They tried the Kambas, it was a problem. They tried the Kikuyus, it was a problem. Now, Kalenjins, until they figured out Busia, Bungoma, and Kisumu. And if you look, it's a historical fact. If you look even at colonialism, there was a lot of displacement of the other communities from their parcels of land for agricultural purposes. On the western side, it was mainly forced labor, either into the army or into railways. So all these Luyas and Luos who were taken to Mombasa to be cranes and then left along the railway places like Nairobi, Nakuru, and the rest of them, had to live somewhere. But because of that bed space theory, the accommodation was designed in such a way that the men lived alone. When your wife wanted to visit, you had to advise the manager of the estate and give her name and the date she will visit and when she will leave. Which would be the same classical case like ancient cities of Europe. This word citoyen, citizen, in places like Geneva, you couldn't just walk into a city. You had to be known that you're a citizen. So along Jogoo Road, if you go to Nakuru, all the railway quarters, if your wife wanted to come, you had to tell the manager that my wife will arrive on this day for conjugal rights for this number of days, and then she will leave, and she has to sign and leave. So we are still addressing the issues of bed space theory. In terms of way forward, I think we need to do a few things as a country. One is to create enough knowledge on homelessness, academic research, surveys, and the rest. We need to know what homelessness is in urban areas, but also the lack of adequate sanitation in rural areas. We are doing a lot of affordable housing, but you can clearly see that they are not knowledge-driven, the way we are doing our affordable housing. It's not knowledge-driven. And if the academics here, I would like to hear your views. I'll give you some examples. The affordable housing program in Ngong, you know where the vet farm was, they've cut a portion at the back, and they've done, I think, 2,000 units. There's no sewage line there. And they've not started building the digester for 2,000 homes. People, I think, are already buying or paying deposits. But if you want to put 2,000 people in a place and you don't give them a sewage line or a digester, what are you telling them? They'll buy houses, then later you'll think of putting it up. That is not knowledge-driven construction. If you look at France and a lot of the European countries, in the 40s and 50s, when there was heavy migration into Europe from North America and parts of West Africa, they went and built all these big towers. And the people moved in, settled there. The first generation did very well. Second generation. The third, they became slums. And today, they are controlled by gangs. Even the police can't go there. If you go to France, it's a big problem. And it is not very far from us. If you go to Jogorod, that 2-bedroom in Jerusalem, now housing the 5th generation, around it, there are Mabati structures, isn't it? And there are 3 generations, you know, some are up, some are out, some in the Mabati, 1 kitchen, 1 toilet, because of the question of what I think we need to address, our second problem, apart from creating knowledge, affordability and incomes. You can't solve the issue of homelessness or inadequate housing if you don't address the question of affordability and incomes. The reason why the high-rise buildings in France have become ghettos and very insecure places is because of incomes and affordability. It's the same thing with Jerusalem. If you go to Eastland, I mean, when we were young, we used to go there. There were many open spaces. People would play football there. There are yards. You could park your car. You walked into a building. Today, you can't. Because 5 children, 1 has made it through. The other 4, 3 girls, have had families with no husbands. Yeah, they can't go anywhere. So they put mabatis around the structures and more mabatis. And the parents probably have retired but not gone home. So they remain in the main house with the grandchildren while the others leave. It's happening there. In France, it even became worse because the lifts couldn't be maintained. Water couldn't be paid for, electricity. So the security is to make sure government presence is not there. So they don't pay the water, they don't pay everything. Everything is connected illegally, and it's a big problem. And then the final thing, I think we need to, as a government, focus on social protection programs. That's why I talked of social market economy, where you have private market-driven economic arrangements, but the government engages in social protection for its citizens, the vulnerable ones. So I think that is one area that we really need to focus on.